All right. Well, let me get started. First off, I want to say that, as I have mentioned, MBAG has prepared the greenhouse gas inventories for all of our member jurisdictions in 2005, 2010, and 2015. And then starting in 2018, through an MOU with Central Coast Community Energy, we received funding to prepare greenhouse gas inventories on behalf of the 3CE member jurisdictions for the year 2018, 2019, and 2020. And so this 2018 inventory was provided under that MOU. So usually before starting to sort of go into the meat of the inventories, I do like to define a few terms. The first one is the baseline year, and that's simply the year against which emissions are tracked over time. And that's important to know because there's of course different state mandated targets that have a certain baseline year, and then sometimes the baseline year that's used by the cities is different. Then the greenhouse gases really that we consider in the inventories are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And then these emissions are then expressed in equivalents of carbon dioxide. And so the way that that's done is that both methane and nitrous oxide have a multiplier that's assigned to them so that they get translated into this carbon dioxide equivalent. And then finally, a community greenhouse gas inventory, and that's just really to define the scope of what we're trying to get at, is really we're trying to calculate the emissions that are generated as a result of the community itself. And so that's really the scope of the inventory, is trying to figure out, as a result of everything that the community of Carmel does, what are the greenhouse gas emissions? Now, to put everything into context, I want to talk briefly about what are the reduction targets that exist. So first, the baseline year that the state uses for statewide targets is 1990. Now, most cities do not have 1990 inventories, and it's not possible to get data for 1990. Therefore, most cities use 2005 as a baseline year. And the assumption that's made is that 2005 emissions are about 15% higher than 1990 emissions. So sort of with that understanding, the 2020 target was to return to 1990 levels. And so what that means is from the 2005 level, we were trying to reduce emissions 15%. The next target is the SB32 target, and that is a 40% reduction from 1990 levels. That corresponds to about a 48% reduction from the 2005 level. And then the final target that we're under currently in the California Air Resources Board scoping plan on climate change is the executive order that was passed by Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2005, and that is to reduce emissions 80% from the 1990 levels, about 85% from the 2005 levels. However, in 2018, Governor Brown passed a new executive order, and that executive order sets the goal of achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. And the California Air Resources Board has to do their scoping plan every 5 years. The last time they did their scoping plan was in 2017, which is why the 80% target by 2050 is still the official target. When they update their scoping plan in 2022, it is expected that the carbon neutrality target by 2045 will become the official target. So really, for now, there's sort of two competing long-term targets, but we really do expect that 2045 target to become the main target moving forward. Now, with all that being said, we can look at your emissions now, and as you see, we've prepared emissions inventory for 2005, 2010, 2015, and 2018. And I'll first go through what's included in each sector before talking about the reductions that we've seen. So in the residential and the commercial industrial sector, these are electricity and natural gas emissions. So essentially the GHG emissions that are occurring as a result of both electricity use and natural gas use. In the transportation sector, these are the emissions that occur as a result of travel on local roads in the city of Carmel. And then for solid waste, it's emissions as a result of the waste that is emitted, that is generated by the community and sent to landfills. And finally, wastewater is the emissions from resulting from the treatment of the wastewater, the process itself. For the energy use emissions, we go directly to the source. We get data from PG&E and 3CE in terms of how much usage exists, as well as how intensive the electricity is in terms of GHG emissions. For the transportation data, we use a report that's prepared every year by Caltrans that looks at the amount of vehicle mile traveled on local roads in the city of Carmel, as well as use the California Air Resources Board MFAC model, which is a model to estimate emissions from on-road cars, if you will, driving. And then for the solid waste, we rely on the CalRecycle data that gets reported every year, as well as solid waste characterization studies that essentially tell us what the waste in the landfill is composed of in terms of plastic, metals, and organics. And finally, for the wastewater, we use a population-based method with different equations that use the population to estimate the emissions. And the results of the analysis is that in the residential sector, there was a reduction of 30%. In the commercial and industrial sector, there was a reduction of 43%. The transportation, a reduction of 50%. In the solid waste, a reduction of 46%. And in the wastewater sector, an increase of 1%, for a total of a 42% reduction. Now, it's important to say that when we do these inventories, it's not possible for us to determine exactly what caused every reduction because we are looking at a macro city level. However, it is possible for us to have some insight as to what may have caused these emissions to behave the way they did. So with that being said, in the residential and commercial industrial sector, really the main driver that we've seen has been the electricity from 2005 to 2018 just becoming that much cleaner. And really that's what's been driving these emissions down, is the fact that even though the electricity use has remained stable, over time, the carbon intensity of the electricity has reduced drastically. For the transportation sector, the main cause of the reduction is that in the data sources that we've gathered, which has remained consistent over time, they've reported less and less travel on local roads. Now, because there is such a big decrease, there is a question there of, is it possible that somehow Caltrans, which produces these reports, changed their methodology, and might that account for some of the reduction that we're seeing? And there, unfortunately, because the data that they provide is just provided as a finished product, there's no way for us to know what methodology was used to gather it. They just tell us that it was done with traffic counts. And so there is a question of, has the methodology changed? And maybe is that part of the reduction? For the solid waste, we're seeing a reduction of 46%. And that is a reduction that is really to do with the fact that the solid waste amounts, the tons of solid waste being sent to the landfill by the city has decreased drastically, as well as a ton of solid waste is essentially considered to be less impactful in 2015 and 2018 than it was in 2005 and 2010. The composition of the waste has changed, if you will. And there again, we rely on using the same data sources. And so we know that CalRecycle gets the data and then reports it. We, however, don't know how that data is generated. So there's always the question of, again, could potentially part of this reduction that we're seeing maybe be due to the fact that the data has been reported in a different way. And the next slide shows you, sorry, looks like I skipped one. There we go. The next slide shows you the percent of each of the sectors And as you can see, your residential and your commercial industrial sector are the bigger sectors. They really compose the majority of your inventories at almost 36% and almost 25%, respectively. And then you have transportation at 31.1%, solid waste at 7.8%, and wastewater at 0.3%. And now, when we go just looking at the energy use portion of this pie, so 60.8% of the emissions, it's quite important to realize that really the vast majority, 91% of your energy use emissions come from natural gas. And so because the electricity is now so much cleaner than it was in 2005, it's really been reduced down significantly, where, again, the majority of your remaining emissions are to do with natural gas. Now, Agnes asked me to also provide a brief overview of how a climate action plan is completed. But before I do that, I was wondering if there's any questions on the greenhouse gas inventory itself, and then I can start talking about the climate action planning process. Right, so if there's no questions, I'll maybe just continue talking about the steps to complete a climate action plan, and once the presentation is done, I can take questions on both topics.
That sounds good.
Okay, great. So sort of the next part of this is congratulations, you have completed a baseline greenhouse gas inventory as well as subsequent greenhouse gas inventories. So you've completed really the first step to creating a climate action plan. The next step would be to conduct what's called a business as usual forecast. And that is simply using growth rates that MBAG prepares for population, employment, and housing to forecast out the emissions linearly out into your horizon year. So either 2035, 2030 for the SB 32 target, 2045, or 2050 for those longer term targets. Now, because we know that the state has passed a lot of different pieces of legislation as well as has different regulations on, for example, building codes or fuel efficiency standards, the next step after creating this BAU forecast, business as usual forecast, would be to adjust it in order to account for those statewide mandates that will reduce emissions. And then once you've done that, you can look at the difference between the adjusted business as usual forecast down to the target. And that is the portion of emissions that a climate action plan would address. Because this is sort of theoretical, I did want to provide sort of a graphical representation of what that looks like. And so what you're seeing here is, this is, of course, this isn't representative of your city. This is just an example to kind of show you what it looks like. You're seeing in 2005, the emissions, and then the dark blue line is the business as usual forecast, and you're seeing it sort of increase. Then you have the adjusted business as usual forecast, and you're seeing that decrease with the impacts of the different state legislations. And then the light gray line are the statewide goals, and you're seeing that go sort of way down. And so the difference between the light blue line and the gray line is the greenhouse gas emissions that need to be addressed as part of the climate action plan. Now, once you've done that, and you know what's your target and how many GHG emissions reductions you need to achieve, the next step would be to really conduct a broad public engagement process to try to determine what are the needs and wants of the community and how do they align with different measures that could be implemented to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Once you've done the public engagement process, then you can draft your greenhouse gas reduction measures. Usually these would have the greenhouse gas reduction potentials, the costs, and maybe even funding sources that are identified. Here, it's important to mention that it is, in order to have a successful climate action plan, the more specific you can be, the better, in terms of how the measures will be implemented and how the monitoring requirements will work for each of these reduction measures. Once you've created the reduction measures, you would then create the draft plan with all of the language and put it out for public comment. Now, if the plan would be used for purposes of CEQA streamlining for future projects or as part of a general plan update, you would have to have some type of an EIR process in order to get it certified. And here it's important to mention, if you go the route of doing a full EIR, of course it would be done sort of in the same time frame as the climate action plan is being created. In some cases, however, some plans have gone on to do sort of CEQA certification processes that are less detailed, for example, doing a negative declaration, but really that's something that you would work with your consultant on determining what process to follow. And then once that's been done, you would adopt the climate action plan, which would become sort of the official document used to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in your city. And then the last thing that I'll say is, from the first generation of climate action plans that were created, most of them had a horizon year of 2020. And what they realized is that sometimes these documents don't live up to their full potential. And so really implementation is where the rubber meets the road in terms of successfully planning for climate change. And so that's very important to keep in mind when creating a climate action plan. And so really, again, it's important to say that each greenhouse gas reduction measure ideally should have some type of funding sources identified, as well as a dedicated staff time or resources that would be used for implementation, so that once the document is created, we know exactly how to implement it to make sure that those greenhouse gas reduction measures live up to their full potential. And again, as part of that, it's important to have implementation metrics that can be used for each of the measures to know whether or not the measure is performing as it was written. So I think with that, that concludes my presentation, so I can answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Any questions from committee members or the public? Libby?
Yes, hi, thank you for that. When on your last slide, you had said that you need to attach a funding source with those greenhouse gas targets. Can you explain that a little bit further, what you mean by funding source? Maybe I'm missing something.
You don't have to attach a funding source, but this is for the greenhouse gas reduction measures. So what you would do is create a list of measures that would be implemented in order to meet your greenhouse gas reduction target. If you are able to attach a funding source or a mechanism by which each measure will be implemented, it makes the implementation of the plan much easier to achieve, because there's a very clear and specific way for the measure to be implemented. If the measure is created without any resources dedicated to it, it will become harder, if you will, in future years to implement that measure.
Anne-Marie, this is Scott. Thank you for the presentation. One other question, would another item in that same category be identification of policy changes? So obviously funding sources could be important. Others might be a matter more of policy changes. Would that be, does that sound right?
Yeah, sometimes I think definitely at the state level, there will be policy changes in the intervening years that will make it easier or harder to implement a climate action plan. So definitely also making sure that there is, I think this would be more to do with the fact that the climate action plan, there should be a reporting mechanism, and that reporting mechanism would also include some type of monitoring of the climate situation, if you will, so that the plan can be updated if it does need to be updated because there's policy changes that sort of change the environment that we're in.
Yeah, I think Scott was referring to policy changes at the city level that would, require maybe city departments or builders or residential areas maybe to modify how they do things. Is that right?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification on this. That was a bit more of my thinking, yeah.
Right. Well, in that case, I think that would be included in every measure. So, for example, if you have a measure that's to do with how your, let's say, the planning department issues permits, that can be sort of identified in the measure, and then really the staff the staff resources would be included as part of the fact that you're changing the policy, for example. So it's really, what's needed is really dependent on each measure. I think it's really important for each measure to really think deeply about what is needed for the measure to be a success. And if it's a policy change, then that's really great. If it's resources, then that works too. It's really a matter of making sure that every measure is set up for success, if you will.
Anybody else? Okay, I have a few questions, Amory. First, thank you for coming back to see us again. As I said before, we've missed you a lot. When we start preparing our climate action plan, do you think are the appropriate goals the 2030 and the 2050 goals? Like, what should we aim for? You know, carbon neutrality, or the 2030 or 2050 goals, or all of them?
So I definitely think that the appropriate 2030 goal is the SB 32 target. That really is the goal that's set in the legislature, and that's part of the CARB scoping plan. For the longer goals, I've seen it done both ways. So that currently there's a little bit of uncertainty. If you want to go by the book and by what is strictly required in the scoping plan, then it's the 2050 target. If you want to look ahead a little bit and say, we think that the next scoping plan will include the 2045 target, then you can choose to do that. Both of them currently are appropriate. Okay, so when you at the beginning of the presentation, you did some numerical calculations to go, since we don't have the 1990 inventories, we only have the 2005 inventories. You sort of translated the 2030 numbers from 48% to 48%, from 40% to 48%. And I think you know what I'm talking about. When you got to the 2050 numbers, you translated 80% to something else, but I missed what the something else was. So what's the reduction from the 2005 number that we're looking for the 2050 numbers? It's about 85%.
Okay.
So that would be the reduction that you would be looking for. And okay. I'm sorry, I believe actually it's 86%. It's all due to the fact that you're not starting from 1990, and instead you went up, and then you have to go down more. Really, to simplify it, and this is more based on the 2045 targets, and then I heard this in a webinar, and I like the formula because it's simple. The person said, from a 2005 baseline, the way you can think of it is you had to reduce emissions 15% by 2020, you have to cut your emissions in half by 2030, and you need to reach carbon neutrality by 2045.
So carbon neutrality, so let's be clear that but carbon neutrality in the context in which you use it is that our emissions are basically zero.
Yes, the emissions are basically zero. That, however, that can be achieved through some type of negative emissions, if you will, in whatever shape that takes. All the emissions, I think that everyone understands that not all emissions can be reduced down to zero. So there will be some type of sequestration, if you will, that will be needed.
And what are some examples? What are some real life examples of these negative emissions that we should sort of think about as we go along? Whatever's least expensive, or?
So there, I think, and I'm not an expert on this topic, so I don't want to lead anyone down a false path. But I think the safe bet would be to look at what the California Air Resources Board currently uses for the current process for creating mitigation credits. and then those, my understanding is that those would be appropriate because there's already a system by which they're already being used. However, many cities are just creating climate action plans with a time horizon of 2030, and they're still using 2050 as the target for that reason, to avoid having to talk about the sequestration or other negative emissions that they would need to include. One city that I have seen talk about it in their climate action plan is the city of San Luis Obispo. They adopted a sort of, I want to say, a more stringent target for themselves. And so as a result, they do talk about in their climate action plan about negative emissions and what they plan on, the measures they plan on implementing to have negative emissions. So that could be something to look to and look at what they did and maybe try to emulate them, for example.
Okay. When you talked about us creating sort of our emissions forecast, and you talked about this BAU and the adjustment for statewide mandates, so presumably those are things that we're going to have to do, whether we indicate them in our climate action plan or not. Do you know of any of those statewide mandates right now?
Yeah, the statewide mandates are pretty well established. It's things like Title 24 is a big one, the PAVLI, fuel efficiency standards, of course, the RPS standards, and in our case, the commitments that 3C has made about having fully renewable electricity. So those are the types of adjustments that you would use to make to do the adjusted forecast. Another one would be the different regulations that are being put into place with for example, SB 1383 with solid waste and organics. So those are the types of mandates that you would consider in order to create an adjusted business as usual forecast.
Do you think, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit, I see that our next talk is from actually after you leave, we're going to hear from 3CE. Do you think that how much risk do you think that municipalities that purchase energy from 3CE are at? If 3CE finds itself unable to deliver 100% renewable energy, that would be bad for us? Any ideas?
I think that 3CE is trying to be leaders on renewable generation, and their commitment sort of goes above and beyond what the mandates are created by the legislature. There are California-wide mandates, though, that do dictate 100% renewable electricity by 2045, I believe. So the mandates do exist at the statewide level. It's just that 3CE has taken the step of saying, well, we're going to meet those mandates earlier than anticipated. So you wouldn't really be running any risk by including them in the climate action plan, because even if it's not met by a specific date, it will have to be met by 2045, just based on the laws that have been passed.
Okay, one final question, and thank you everybody for bearing with me. We obviously Carmel's economy is pretty tourism based, and people get here through a lot of different means. They drive here, they fly here. I wish more people would bike here, but that's probably not going to happen. What all those emissions that are generated by all of our visitors, what municipalities are they charged to for greenhouse gas emissions? Like how much are we on the hook for versus, let's say someone comes from San Francisco and they drive through all these other counties. Are those other counties like San Francisco County and San Mateo County and Santa Cruz County, are they on the hook for those VMTs that people coming to Carmel drive through?
So the way that we currently do the calculation is sort of I want to say almost a cookie cutter we put boundaries around the city, and we literally just look at the roads that the city maintains, and we just look at the VMTs on those roads. That's because the transportation model that MBAG creates can't go down to the city level to estimate out all the different trips that might be happening at the city level. In the Bay Area, they feel like the model that they use is sort of, it's called an activity-based model. And essentially, the alternative methodology that they use is they say that if a trip occurs 100% within the city, then it's counted 100% towards that city. But then if a trip starts or ends in a city, then it gets counted 50% towards that city's total. All that to say that there's really different methodologies that are lined out in the U.S. Community Protocol to calculate emissions. And that we, because of the tools that we have at our disposal, are using one methodology that just looks at local roads, but other jurisdictions have used different methodologies which do try to account for people coming in and out of the city on longer trips, if you will.
So in the numbers that you've given us, I'm looking at the 2018 number. It says that transportation accounts for 7,400 about metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. But if we used one of those alternative methodologies, we might find that the number might be 15,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 metric tons, right?
Yes. That is correct. And I think that's why it's so important when creating greenhouse gas inventories. You have to be very clear about what methodology you're using, and also that the methodology is consistent across years. Because what you want to do is make sure that you're counting the same thing year after year after year, so that you can compare it across years. So let's say if you wanted to use the alternative methodology, you would have to use it, let's say in 2018 or 2019 or whatever year it is, but also use it in 2005 so that you can then compare the 2005 emissions to the 2018 or 2019 emissions to know how the emissions have evolved.
But that would obviously be pretty difficult for our community to do, to go back and sort of retroactively calculate where all our visitors came from in 2005 and how they all got here. Right.
The way that it would have to be done is through some type of a model, and it is definitely, backcasting emissions is definitely a challenge. So it is definitely something. It's definitely something that, as an organization, MBAG is looking to in terms of the model that we use, and we're currently in the process of updating our model. And it's definitely something that we're trying to keep in mind in terms of making sure that we account for as many emissions as we can, so that we really don't just leave a lot of emissions on the table, but also to make sure that the emissions we do account for are realistic for the cities to address. Because, for example, part of the problem, if you're saying that you're going to take the emissions from tourism, really from people driving to Carmel, you don't have jurisdiction over the roads that they're using to come into your city, and it becomes extremely hard for you to mitigate those emissions, if you will.
Okay, well, I'll stop my questions and mark this down as an issue that maybe the committee will discuss later. Gary?
Thank you. I just need some clarity here. I'm looking at your table 1 in the report where you summarize the percent change from 2005 to 2018. So are you saying that we've already hit our 2030 goal of 42% reduction?
So according to the analysis, you have reached a 42% reduction, and the target is a 48% reduction.
48, okay. So I see, it's 48. I heard 40. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So if we so it's going to be interesting if you look at what's happened in 2020 in terms of not many people driving, very few tourists due to COVID. These numbers are probably going to go down quite a bit, wouldn't you say?
Yes. it is possible that the numbers will go down. We don't know to what extent they will go down, but definitely 2020 will be a year, we think, with less transportation emissions. What we don't know yet is there was less emissions in terms of the commercial energy use, but definitely on the residential side, more people stayed at home, and so it would follow that they use more natural gas and more electricity in their homes.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Good point. And the other thing is, you said that if we do our own gas emissions inventory report and integrate that into the general plan, we have to do an EIR for that?
That is one possibility, yes.
Is that right, Anya? That's scaring me, okay?
Well, it's either an EIR, we'd have to go with, figure out with planning, what environmental document we would have to do, but we need to do an environmental document as part of any general plan update. And the climate action plan would be part of it.
Okay, all right.
And
At the very least,
Evan might be, yeah, there you go.
It would start. I see Brandon's raising his hand. He can correct me if I'm wrong. It would start with an initial study, and the initial study would inform the following environmental document. The handful of climate action plans I've looked at, they seem to have been a negative declaration, which means that there's no adverse environmental impact. I don't think we can safely assume that would be the case, but that does seem to be the trend with the handful of initial studies that I've looked at for other climate action plans. The general plan update itself, though, likely would, I don't want to say likely, but it's more possible that would require an EIR.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could add to that just a second, Evan, I think you got most of the way. Hi, everybody. This is Brandon Swanson, new director for community planning and building. And I apologize, my camera isn't working, but that is what my face looks like on the screen there. And so just to add on to what Evan had to say there, we have an EIR that currently exists for our general plan for the city. So the way the CEQA process works is if you have an existing EIR, you can do something, either an addendum, which is very simple. It's essentially just writing what's being added. If there's more major changes, if the climate action plan were to be folded into the general plan, and it was more major changes, we could do the next step up, which is either a supplemental or subsequent EIR. There's a little bit of a nuance between the two of those, but CEQA allows for tiering off of existing EIRs. So we certainly wouldn't be doing a brand new EIR if we were going to incorporate it into our general plan, but we would have to do something to our existing EIR if it were to be incorporated into our general plan.
Oh, thank you, Evan and Brandon, for clarifying that. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anybody else? Libby?
Yes, hi. Omri, you had a, shoot, my phone's ringing. You had a slide up there that said that, there was, Carmel needed to meet a certain percentage of the targets to get to it'd be helpful to see that slide, that, there was room for improvement. And in what area do you think that would be the most significant in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions for the city?
So I think essentially
in what sector, I guess, is what I'm asking.
In any really climate action plan, you really end up wanting to target the sectors that sort of have the most emissions. And so in your case, just looking at the graph, what you're looking at is really natural gas and transportation and solid waste. Those are sort of the three things that remain. And so really most of the measures in my mind would be based on those three things. So reducing transportation emissions, and then reducing the natural gas emissions and the solid waste emission. And again, when we look at this pie, we see that natural gas is now really the majority of emissions from your energy mix. So really, that's where you would have to see reductions in order to meet those targets.
Thank you.
Good question.
I have a question for you, Amory, to piggyback off of Libby's question. When you were talking about the different sectors and you were talking about the transportation sector, is it ever worth it to look at how Caltrans generates these numbers or how these numbers are generated to specifically target the things that are causing VMTs to happen within our city? Or it seems really like it's an uncomfortable black box for me, and I'm just wondering if you have heard this from others.
So the way that they create the report is they just provide a number of miles of roads that they say that each city maintains, and then an associated and daily vehicle mile traveled. And then what we do is we use the MFAC model, which is created by the California Air Resources Board. And for each county, they have essentially, they line out the composition of the vehicle fleet in the county, if you will, with essentially all the different passenger cars, trucks, everything. And we just assign those VMTs proportionally to each type of vehicle. There is really no way for us to know, to enter the black box, to know how they came up with those VMT numbers. What we do know is that it's done through a combination of modeling and traffic.
So to use me as an example, I park my car in front of my house, and generally all of my trips are to places outside of the city of Carmel. But the County of Monterey, the Air Resources Board in the County of Monterey has assigned some number to my car, and the city of Carmel gets, this isn't the right word, but the city of Carmel gets charged VMTs based on my share of all of the VMTs in the County of Monterey. So those miles aren't necessarily driven inside the city of Carmel, because I don't drive my car inside the city of Carmel, basically, but we are still sort of responsible for them, right?
The way that it works is your car is part of the fleet of all the cars that get driven in Monterey County. The California Air Resources Board creates, with the MFAC model, essentially the emissions for the entire county of Monterey, with all the different vehicle class that exist in the county of Monterey. And that's sort of one model that is the MFAC model. Then in a completely separate process, Caltrans publishes what's called the public roads data, and it's based on data that they themselves obtained from the highway performance monitoring system, where they say for each jurisdiction, here's how many miles they maintain, and on those miles of roads, here's how much gets driven. And then what MBAC does is we take that amount of driving that occurs on Carmel's roads, and we take it and we run it through the MFAC model in order to obtain a set of emissions.
Okay.
So we combine essentially we combine two tools, because while at the countywide level, the model that CARB has created is really good at estimating emissions, it doesn't go down to the city level. And really that's the sort of the issue for most of these data sources that we use. The reason why we use them is because all of the data sources were created with a county-wide level in mind, not going down to the city level. And so we sort of have to do workarounds to be able to bring it down to the city level and have numbers specifically for Carmel.
Okay, thank you. I'm being told that we should move on, which is probably right. I see Lynette's hand is raised. You have a quick question, Lynette?
Hopefully this will be a quick one. I'm just wondering, and thank you, Amory, this was really an excellent presentation, what you are seeing and what you find really successful as efforts to reduce the natural gas use on both the commercial and the residential side. what really is making a difference for any municipality now?
Right. So I'll first start by saying that it's definitely hard, but what we've seen as well, first, preventing new natural gas consumption from essentially the consumption from increasing. And so for that, we've seen, well, the efforts, for example, that 3CE is doing of having new construction not add natural gas onto the system, but then to reduce the existing natural gas consumption. Really, it's about energy efficiency, so things like smart thermostats, but then also just replacing the equipment that is natural gas powered with electricity powered. And it's very complex and it's an emerging field, but really at the end of the day, that's what it will take is to remove something that is powered by natural gas and replace it with something that is powered by electricity.
Thank you. And I know, well, follow on. Are there incentives in place, or are those forthcoming in order to encourage residents and commercial entities to do that?
I think I'll let 3CE speak to the incentive that they've created, but there are definitely incentives that exist. But again, because it's emerging, I do think that we're going to see more and more incentive. We're sort of I think in the infancy of decarbonization and in what they call fuel switching. So some incentives, and then I think that in the future we'll see a lot more incentives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie. Really appreciate all the work that you've done for us.
And thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to present the inventory as well to answer any questions that you might have. I think it's very important for everyone to consider climate change and do their part to reduce emissions. So I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can.
Thank you. So we'll move on to our next order of business presentation from Central Coast Community Energy on their climate action initiatives and their new energy procurement strategy. Agnes?
And we have J.R. Killigrew from the Director of Communications and Outreach for 3CE. J.R.?
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you to the City of Carmel's Climate Committee for having 3CE here today. Councilmember Barron, it's good to see you again. I know I presented to council a couple months ago, so always nice to see your face and the great work that's happening here in Carmel. So give me a second before I get my screen up and running. Your entire screen. Okay. How's that looking at everybody? Good? Okay, off we go. So I'd like to just frame up a little bit before I get started, because I know I want to be mindful of time, but you know, you probably are all aware of us originally as Monterey Bay Community Power, but we've had a pretty significant expansion over the last 2+ years that led us to change our name. So we are now formally Central Coast Community Energy. That's the name on our Joint Powers Authority document. And we are now 33 strong. So that's 29 cities and 4 counties across the Central Coast. As you know, we started in the Monterey Bay region with the leadership of the City of Carmel as one of the founding members. And now we have spread across the entire Central Coast. So it does go to show that this model does work with communities of all shapes and sizes, all socioeconomic classes, to really drive, you know, meaningful change, both in terms of addressing climate change, but also economic development. I'll let you folks kind of look over the expansion timeline, but it's been pretty intense the last couple of years, but it's good for us to now be able to kind of define our service area and really focus on driving value through programs and efforts to help address electrification and resiliency in the Central Coast. You know, some of the accomplishments, I always kind of gently want to pat ourselves on the back in light of this pandemic right now that's ravaging not only the Central Coast, but also the entire world. Just from a standpoint of adhering to our promises to make sure we were fiscally responsible. We did receive an A credit rating from Standard & Poor's. That's probably one of the toughest credit ratings to get an A from. And that goes to show you that this agency has been around for about 3 years and it was able to achieve a investment grade credit rating. It just goes to show you that we've been able to not only deliver discounts on rates, allocate funding for programs, but also make sure that we had the financial position to be able to be in, I would say, one of the best, if not the best financial positions of any CCA in the state of California. You know, COVID's on everybody's mind right now, but this is just a gentle reminder about the fact that we did reduce all of our customer rates by 50% as a way to address the COVID-19 pandemic. So that actually equated to about $24 million of financial relief. So pivoting now to what we have done recently and how this relates to, you know, the city of Carmel and its climate efforts. I always kind of, I laugh because Amory and I have gone back a long time. I worked at ICLEI when we helped design the U.S. Community Protocol, which is what everybody's using to kind of identify missions and climate action plans. And, you know, I think what's interesting when you work for an electric utility, you really, you get the kind of the blinds pulled back in terms of how electricity actually works. And I think some of the kind of challenges you face in terms of what's being marketed and sent out and actually what's being delivered on the grid on a second by second basis. So, you know, when we say clean and renewable, we have to kind of make sure that these are caveats, that this is not every second of the day. The California Independent Systems Operator, the CAISO, and the CPUC have said that there will always be natural gas on the grid at 2045. So there is going to be natural gas on the grid. I think folks just need to get comfortable with that. So when we talk about clean and renewable, it's about the type of resources that we're putting on the grid on behalf of our customers, as opposed to the entire grid being rid of fossil fuels by 2045. There will be natural gas on the grid. I'm sorry to say that. I know that may kind of burst some people's bubbles, but in order to have a reliable, safe grid, much like what we saw in Texas, much like what we've seen recently in terms of the grid itself, there will be fossil fuel resources on the grid for the not so distant future. So I think the biggest takeaway that we want to share with people today is what an electricity service provider like 3CE or even PG&E is doing is what kind of resources are you putting on the grid? And then the frequency that you put those resources on the grid, when do they come at? So we originally started with this idea of a carbon-free grid portfolio. And again, that was balanced on an annual basis. So basically, we would go out and source, you know, attributes, whether it's renewable attributes, renewable energy, or large hydro attributes. But we'd also have to deliver energy on an hourly basis to the CAISO, to the grid operator, as a reliable grid participant. You know, we actually saw that price and the cost of that philosophy and that approach go up pretty significant. And with the huge decrease in utility scale renewable projects, whether it's geothermal, solar plus storage, wind, and even the potential of biomass coming online, there are tremendous opportunities for us to lock in long-term, very competitive pricing for renewables for basically 10, 15, 20 years. And prices are at an all-time low. So basically, we're able to capitalize on a marketplace that is seeing extremely competitive pricing for renewable resources. Again, they're not deployed 24/7. I think that's the other thing that we have to kind of get comfortable with is when the sun goes down, what is being utilized? You know, when the wind's not blowing, what is being utilized? So again, I like to be transparent about this. I mean, we can totally have a conversation about, you know, everything being perfect and emissions being magically reduced. But I think the point of this approach and this pathway is it is the most aggressive that any CCA's made. And the commitment and the goal that we're making is that we balance it on a monthly basis. So in a monthly basis, we would put on the grid, let's say, 1,000 units of clean energy that would match the 1,000 units of energy that our customers consume. It's not an hourly balanced approach. The idea of being able to hourly balance clean and renewable resources for 8,760 hours, you would need nuclear, you would need hydro, and you would probably need a whole other fleet of solar plus storage and wind, and actually even probably offshore wind resources to get there. So this is a significant move forward. It's the most aggressive to date. But again, it will not guarantee you that every second of the day your energy is coming from clean and renewable resources. We just want to be clear about that, because that is something that I think when we look at the grid and we look at emissions in California, there is a ton of work to be done. In terms of reducing grid-related emissions, transportation-related emissions, as well as emissions in the both built environment, not only as well as the way in which we process kind of waste. So again, the way emissions accounting is done, we're here to help deploy an effort that will help kind of gradually scale each one of the communities that we serve towards a 2030 target, which is the kind of next, I'd say, interim target, such that when cities go from their 2020 goal to then their 2030, which is usually an interim goal for a lot of cities and counties, having this kind of clean and renewable portfolio by 2030 will help to, I would say, more accurately depict what the emissions will look like in 2030 than what is actually being depicted right now. So I think we're moving well beyond what kind of the emissions accounting standard has kind of presented, which is a market-based approach. It doesn't necessarily tell you the accurate story. So again, we can do this from a financial position that really drives a ton of opportunity for economic development in the state of California, but then also really help to scale out and not have to procure grid energy and replace it with clean and renewable resources. These are a couple of the recent power supply efforts that we have. I think the most exciting thing is the long duration storage. So the thing that we have to realize is, again, natural gas is running the grid every second of the day. It ranges from being sometimes 20% of the grid to almost 40% of the grid on a daily basis. I would highly encourage you all to go to the California Independent Systems Operator website. That gives you the most transparent look at what is being put onto the grid to power the state of California. They are a phenomenal resource, and it gives you transparency to realize that what is actually being consumed at every second of the day. The biggest challenge we have with renewable energy right now is storing it and dispatching it for enough time to kind of not have us use natural gas resources. So right now, the kind of utility model for energy storage is about 4 hours. So basically, you imagine you have the sun shining during the day or the wind blowing at off-peak hours. Whatever you don't have to send into the grid that you are kind of responsible for, you can store that in a storage facility, and then you can kind of dispatch it for up to 4 hours. So our recent RFP is asking for technology of 8 hours or more. So you imagine being able to store good clean energy from wind or solar or even other resources and be able to dispatch it for twice, maybe even 3 times. So the sun goes down, the wind stops blowing, and then all of a sudden you have those clean resources that can be deployed strategically for 8, 10, 12, maybe even 14 hours. That really is the holy grail in terms of providing a reliable and clean grid. Now pivoting to local. So we like to kind of frame up our role in the climate effort from the standpoint of we're doing 2 things. At the kind of regional state level, we are helping to reduce emissions with our approach to 100% clean and renewable energy by deploying new clean and renewable resources on the grid. So that's part 1, to help kind of reduce emissions from the grid. Part 2 is what do we do locally within the Central Coast? We set aside about 3% of our gross revenue that's focused on electrification and resiliency. So basically our mantra is we want to stop burning stuff. We want to stop burning stuff at the utility level, at the state level, but then we also want to stop burning stuff at the local level. And that's really focused on the transportation sector, the built environment, and the agricultural sector. You know, a lot of the times in the inventories that are done, like you don't necessarily kind of include the agricultural sector. There are a lot of emissions that come there. So I think it's important for us to see this as this is the largest industry that we have in the Central Coast. So we've made a commitment to really kind of focus and educate and support the ag industry as they kind of transition away from fossil fuels and figure out more innovative ways to reduce emissions while also making sure that we get the good produce from the Central Coast. You know, here's a snapshot of what's available right now. Again, we don't have a program for every single customer, but what we like to do is support our member agencies. So those are our 29 cities and counties. We are working with AMBAG to develop inventories on an annual basis. So that's a good program of collaboration. We also do still have a reach code incentive for any one of our member agencies. The city of San Luis Obispo and the city of Santa Cruz adopted reach codes to basically either eliminate gas in new construction or find some kind of nuance to kind of extend past Title 24 to make sure that there is either limiting or some sort of penalty for kind of using natural gas on new development. And then to complement that, we have been working with a wide variety of housing developers for market and affordable housing to provide incentives for them to build all electric so they cannot have a gas line at all in order to get access to this funding. So I've heard some of the committee members asking about, well, what is out there right now to help make that transition away from natural gas? The lowest hanging fruit is going after new construction, but right now we're only seeing maybe 1 to 2% of the square footage in the Central Coast is being turned over for new housing, whether it's commercial or residential square footage. So it really is only a small sliver, but you get the biggest bang for your buck. So when we're talking about how we're going to address the residential and commercial and industrial sectors when it comes to either diesel consumption or natural gas consumption or propane consumption, that will be the Herculean lift. And there are some innovative ideas that we're having in terms of thinking about how to leverage, energy efficiency funds, but also how to support electrification efforts, because it is a sizable thing. If you're thinking about retrofitting a single family home or apartment complex to get rid of all the gas, it costs a lot of money. So I think that's something that we are very aware of. But I also want to kind of illustrate that we cannot fund everything. So we're really going to look to the state, also regional partners, as well as us to help kind of layer in incentives to make it happen. But right now, actually starting next week, we're really excited that we are launching an EV incentive program. So when you talk about looking at in the city of Carmel, the passenger vehicle miles that are accounted for in your inventory, what is available? So starting next week, any 3CE customer will be eligible to go out and get an incentive for our EV program. I believe it's about $2,000 for a new or to lease or buy a new vehicle. But if you are on CARE, FARA, or 200% above the poverty line, we're actually going to be doubling that incentive. And we'll also be providing incentives for used vehicles. So this is a great opportunity for us to kind of address some of the larger emissions that come from passenger vehicles within the city of Carmel. So again, we'll be happy to share the information on the website with you folks. So if any of you are shopping for an electric car, there are going to be a lot of great resources for you available. So not only from us, but also with the state of California. As I mentioned earlier, we did launch the first new construction electrification grant program in the state of California out of all of the CCAs. So our first tranche, our movement into that was working with developers to provide incentives for both affordable and market rate housing. But now we actually have added a component to support wildfire victims, both in Santa Cruz and Monterey. So if you're aware of anybody who's lost a home in one of the 2020 wildfires in Monterey County, they are eligible for, I think, about $5,000 of an incentive to build back all electric, as well as including incentives for EV chargers for that. So this really provides a unique opportunity for us to support, I believe it's 25 homes that were lost in the wildfires, both in Santa Cruz and Monterey County, as a good opportunity for us to engage and really look at resiliency moving forward. I've spoken about the ag program. This is a good opportunity for our ag customers to get access to up to $20,000 to cover about up to 80% of the cost. And this is a competitive grant application. So looking at electrifying forklifts, pumps, you name it. This is another really exciting opportunity that we're trying to kind of look at all sectors of our kind of economy and our Central Coast to address reducing greenhouse gas emissions, not only within the city of Carmel, but also across the Central Coast. And then the last component I want to mention, and it does have a positive impact, but I just want to flag this, is we will kind of be evolving our rate structure such that we're going to help it to be more simple, more transparent, and more stable. Electric rates as well as natural gas rates continue to go up every year and multiple times per year. So we're looking at launching a new cost of service structure, which allows us to fix our rates for 3 years. So basically the goal would be that starting in October of 2021 through the end of September, what you pay for our electric generation charges would be the same. This is a tremendous evolution. If you look back at what your rates were in 2018 versus now, they've gone up significantly. So this gives us an opportunity to drive even more value, recoup our costs, but also continue to kind of help move the climate effort along the Central Coast. Because at the end of the day, we are only as good as the customers that are enrolled in our program. And these are the innovative ways that we can still make sure we're being financially responsible and stable, but also making sure we have that investment to help kind of address the climate action that's needed in the Central Coast and specifically in Carmel. So I will conclude my presentation. Hopefully I was succinct with your time, considering Omri always does a great job with his presentation. So I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. I'm sure I kind of opened up a whole can of worms for everybody, but I like to educate and give folks full transparency of what in the world the electricity grid, how it operates.
Questions from committee members or the public? John?
Yeah, I have a question. JR, that was excellent, by the way. Regarding the storage that you talked about, they're 4% now, and you're trying to get to 8% or more. How is that storage exactly handled? Is that something that part of 3CE's role, or is that the grid state, or how can you expand on that?
Yeah. And just to clarify, I'm sorry if I use percentages, it's for hours. So normally utility scale storage is on a 4-hour dispatch. And the way it works is we, as well as PG&E and every other entity that operates in California as a load serving entity. So basically they have customers and their responsibility is to go out and source energy from a variety of different projects or sites and then put that on the grid. We go out and contract for projects like solar plus storage. We have a couple that are being built in Kearns and Kings County. So we work with a private developer who can basically monetize any of the tax credits. And we enter into either a 10 or 15 or 20-year contract. And basically they put that energy onto the grid. It gets scheduled in. And then we effectively pay them a fixed price per megawatt hour. So basically the way it works is we don't own anything, just like actually PG&E hasn't owned anything for a long time. Everybody's now contracting with private developers. Some of the municipal utilities are owning some of their projects, but it helps to kind of limit the exposure in terms of kind of anything on your balance sheet or any sort of risk. And also as a public agency, we can't take advantage of any of the tax credits. So we have to work with the developers to do that. So effectively, we contract with them. We agree on like the amount of energy that's going to be produced from the solar array, the amount of energy that's going to be kind of stored in the storage, and it's predominantly from lithium-ion batteries.
Okay.
So that's the major thing. There are some other, I think there's zinc. There's also flow batteries. There's a bunch of other resources that can actually go longer than lithium ion. So there are some other kind of movements in technology to kind of advance us behind just lithium ion. But hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Lynette?
JR, thank you. Wow, really interesting. Having worked the last decade of my career in a traditional utility environment, I cannot tell you how exciting it is that what is happening. The question that I have for you and maybe for other committee members is, what do we do as citizens and as members of this committee to encourage the kinds of things you're doing and to provide support for the choices that you are asking people to make?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Ms. Zimmerman. I think a lot of it is a little bit of courage, of just kind of stepping out. I honestly feel like sometimes word of mouth and what your neighbor is doing ends up being the best way to kind of affect change. I think grassroots efforts like what happened, with launching Monterey Bay Community Power, that started as a grassroots effort, as you all know. It was a bunch of advocates and Supervisor Bruce McPherson, as well as some other leaders up in the Santa Cruz region that kind of brought the Monterey Bay region together. But I think, it really will, it takes behavior change. So I think there's going to be a mixture of technology advancing, that it's cost effective. I think it's reducing anxiety about what's comfortable. I think everyone's comfortable with a gas car. They're comfortable with natural gas cooking their food or heating their homes. It just kind of takes a behavior change and demonstrated effectiveness for folks to be able to want to take the leap. I think, cars may be a little easier to deal with because, folks have a tendency of turning cars over sometime between 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Hot water heaters sometimes take 10 to 15 years to turn over. Furnaces, sometimes 20 years. So there's kind of an effective, useful life and a turnover pace that may kind of slow us. But I think looking at, state policy, the way the California Energy Commission is looking at codes right now is there could be a time in the next code cycle where, all electric for new is just the state code. So it kind of would warrant what we're doing, trying to incentivize right now, obsolete. But that still doesn't address what we're going to do with the existing built environment. So I think what we'll find is, while there's a big push for transportation related dollars through infrastructure as well as through EV incentives, I think kind of as we kind of start moving the transportation sector towards, cleaner vehicles, there's going to be this glaring kind of challenge around the built environment of addressing how we power and use our homes. And I think the really critical thing is, we can't just do energy efficiency and electrification. You also have to introduce storage because, again, as you know, with power outages, it's great to know that you're all electric, but that's not going to serve you if the grid goes down. So I think there's really this evolution that's going to happen where, I think, again, I'll get away from personal opinions, but I think the idea of resilience or independence to know that, hey, my home or my business can operate on its own, I think is a really compelling message. And I think when folks start losing power and they start realizing like the impact that it takes, maybe investing that money up front isn't as kind of challenging an idea, knowing that you can be self-sufficient. There's something, I hate to say it, it's sort of like maybe a reemergence of the American dream of like, I can do this on my own now. I hate to say it, but in a funny way. But I think those, in my mind, are kind of the pieces of the puzzle. But I think it's also important to think about what the cities and the counties can do as they start looking at kind of asking their citizens, their constituents to kind of take the lead. Is how are they leading themselves? How are they shoring up their own operations? How are they setting aside funding to help with local incentives too? You know, are there opportunities where we can look at the cities and counties, we can look at the regional agencies to kind of all partner together to collectively bring resources so that we can really make this push in the Central Coast? So that's a great question. I hope I did that question justice.
Thank you very much.
Carrie?
So great presentation, very enlightening. So part of our message to incentivize people changing from natural gas to electricity, is there, can you give people, for example, a gas water heater compared to an electric water heater? What's the cost savings? Is there one? Part of this is educating people of what it's going to take to do this. So can you give us a sense of that?
Yeah, we can follow up and give you some stuff in writing, so I'm not misquoting anything. But yeah, right now there are incentives. I think what was great is when you log on to the PG&E website, and I always reluctantly, I want to promote them. We are a partner with them, but they have a whole suite of resources and incentives that are currently baked into certain technologies. So I know there are incentives for electric hot water heaters. So that you actually can go and pick one, and then I believe you can go out and buy it, and it gets applied at that point of sale, if I'm not mistaken. So it really helps with the issue of not applying for a rebate and being able to get it at the point of sale. So yes, right now, electric hot water heaters, heat pump hot water heaters are consistent with, yes, sir. Oh, well, this is the city of Carmel. You can say hi. Can I finish up, please? Well, I will be almost done, okay? Oh, hold on. I know, they would love to talk to you too. Thank you. It's okay. Well, I'll be done in a second. Do you want to say go electric? Can you say that? Okay, gentlemen, I will be done. I will be done very soon. Yes. I will be done very soon. Thank you.
The best part of your day. Bravo.
Yes. Apologies. I thought I had locked my door. So yeah, and I think honestly, when you look at the price per kilowatt hour versus the price of natural gas, you do end up getting ahead. I think the one thing to be just conscious about is time of use rates, which everyone is moving towards a time of use rate, unless you are part of some of the exemptions, which would be, if you're on CARE and FARA in hot climate zones, and you basically have not been on an account for 12 months. So basically, if you start using energy during the peak time of days, which is from 3 to 9, then it makes it really difficult. But if most people shower late at night or early in the morning, that's when energy is less expensive. Natural gas, they have a tiering price, so it's not based on time of use, so it's based on volume that you consume. So if you start kind of moving into different tiers, I personally, unfortunately, we rent and we live in a very inefficient house, and our natural gas bill is through the roof. So I know for a fact that moving towards all electric, you are going to be able to drive more value for your home, and also have, I'd say, a more reliable tool, and also not a hazard. I mean, I hate to say it, but you have just a combustible fuel that's kind of operating. And again, there are not a lot of cases where things have gone wrong, but from a standpoint of kind of health and safety in the off gas, there are a lot of reports and from reputable resources that kind of show the challenges with, natural gas in the home, providing heating. as well as for cooking and then for hot water.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. You talked about grid, utility level grid storage of electricity. With the increasing number of people having cars, and now we see battery backup systems for entire houses. Is there a role in all of these electrical storage plans for devices, such as something I might have at my house, either through my car or through something I have in my basement?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilmember Barron. Yes, demand response and basically moving towards a smarter grid where you can leverage what you would call retail customers to participate, which is to be able to either curtail your consumption or actually be able to shift energy back into the grid. Like right now, the California Energy Commission is looking and evaluating the effectiveness of vehicle to grid integration, which means taking your electric vehicle and being able to store energy, but then at times when the grid needs energy, you actually could flow those electrons back onto the grid. And it's the same thing with energy storage, is being able to kind of take the embedded energy that's in these storage devices, whether it's a heat pump water heater or a heat pump heating and cooling system, or even a vehicle or battery storage at your home, and kind of do the same way that your solar array is, which is you generate and you flow it into your house, but you also, when you're not generating, you can flow it back into the grid. So those are really kind of the next step of what we call distributed energy resources that we see as going to be a helpful tool in the future, because the idea, again, it's a healthy idea. But the point is there could be a time in the future where we have a couple thousand different energy storage projects that are all within homes or businesses or apartment buildings that basically can aggregate up to the same equivalent size as one of the utility scale projects. And we actually can kind of use that as a resource to leverage and reduce our costs to buy what they call resource adequacy. Basically, it's insurance for the grid. So instead of having to rely on other resources that are far away, we could rely on these resources, assuming we have the dispatchability to it. And that flows into the electric vehicles, the storage, the heat pumps, you name it. So we don't have that ability with gasoline vehicles or natural gas appliances. So it really kind of unlocks a really, I'd say, an innovative and exciting opportunity for customers to kind of be an active participant in the grid, to monetize it, but also help reduce emissions at the same time. So it becomes a win-win situation.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Quick question. I mean, just to follow up on what you just said, what's the time frame do you see for that to begin happening?
Tomorrow. We're just gonna wave our hands and voila. I think that, like right now with vehicle to grid integration for cars, we're probably, the not so distant future. I mean, the storage component is something that's like a little more scalable right now. But I think a lot of it will have to do with the CPUC, the California Public Utility Commission, is, they're not making it easy to do this. In order to be able to kind of count these resources, they have to be reliable, because the difference is it's a lot easier for the CPUC and the grid operator to look at this huge 300 megawatt battery plant that's just, sitting in Fresno, and they can call on it anytime they want, as opposed to 300 individual homes that they need to call on to kind of dispatch that energy. So I think it's kind of cutting through some of the red tape and providing adequate valuation for it. And that's what they're trying to figure out. So a lot of it is kind of getting through, I'd say, the regulatory body and getting them comfortable with this more dynamic relationship with the grid and customers, and not just relying heavily on these mega battery sites or mega storage sites. So I didn't answer your question, but hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we have a lot more evolution and a lot more pilot programs to really help look at it effectively. So it's definitely there. We're looking at it right now in terms of how we can unlock distributed energy resources in our service area. So I think our first big step will be probably supporting more battery storage, and then also kind of figuring out a way to kind of support vehicle to grid integration would be our first 2 steps.
Great. Laura has a question.
Hi, yes, thank you. JR, that was wonderful. Very good presentation. Much appreciated. I'm very curious about, speaking of storage, I believe it's the world's largest storage battery location. It's at Moss Landing, right next to what used to be the PG&E power plant. Is that online and up and running at this point?
No, the one in Moss Landing, I believe, is still going through the EIRs with the County of Monterey. So yeah, I mean, it's a great project, and I know they are still looking at different off takers, but effectively, yeah, it's going to be a resource adequacy thing where you've got the storage there. It's going to be charged with grid electrons kind of during the day, and then dispatched at the evening times to help with the evening ramp. So that's usually what it's going to be. It's going to be used for that. So off takers like ourselves or anybody else could buy either the resource adequacy of it, basically the insurance, or they actually could buy the electrons that are being put on the grid. So once that thing starts gaining some steam, I know PG&E is actually building it mainly for resource adequacy. So yeah, I think that should be happening in the next few years. And then there's another project down in Morro Bay that actually I think is going to be twice the size of the one in Moss Landing. So that is our service area. So we should have 2 of the more preeminent battery storage projects, in our service area. Well, we have not contracted for it, but it's great to see these old mothballed natural gas plants turn into the future.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. Can I ask one more quick question?
Of course.
I believe there is a considered offshore wind farm in Morro Bay area, and Castle something or other is the name of it. Is that, I thought I saw it on your website.
Yeah. So
looking into it?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. We did enter into an MOU with Castle Wind. They are a very well-respected offshore wind developer out of Europe. But right now, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management is working with the Department of Defense. And now that we have a more supportive, White House about clean energy, we are seeing some of the red tape being loosened up. Some of the major issues with offshore wind in that area is there's a lot of Navy ship patterns there. And the challenge for the Department of Defense is like, well, if we have to activate and you've got this, huge network of wind farms, what's that going to do to our kind of defense strategy? So there is still kind of some, I'd say, dancing with the Department of Defense about, originally it was a much bigger call area. I mean, it was huge, but then it's being condensed to something a little more, something a lot smaller. But I think at the end of the day, if Castle Wind or another developer gets it, I think it would be somewhere from 1,000 to 2,000 megawatts. So it would either be half to maybe the same size of the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant that's operating right now. And the operation date, should an entity get the lease auction and be able to go through all the challenges around the Coastal Commission and everything, and the Department of Defense, hopefully it would be 2027 or 2028 before it was online. So,
got it.
And hopefully it's not too expensive. That's the other thing.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, JR. I appreciate your taking the time out of your day to come talk to us.
Of course. It's always a pleasure. We love connecting with any of the climate committees across our great network of cities and counties. So more than happy to come back or have staff come back. And if you have any questions for us, we're here to support you in every way possible.
Thank you. So let's proceed then on to the third item on our agenda, updates on outreach to community organizations and regional partners. Agnes, do you want to lead this discussion, or should we start with, I know Lynette, this is where Lynette has some comments.
Sure. I just had a couple of notes for the committee. I mean, we've made quite a bit of progress on our community outreach, on reaching out to the organizations that we said we would reach out to. If we look at our table of presentations, we've actually gotten presentations from almost all the organizations we were looking to get presentations from. I believe PG&E might be next month.
PG&E is more than fingers crossed. They have agreed to come next month. We have scheduled it in as long as there's not an emergency.
Right. And, you know, we've gotten through almost everybody except for, you know, maybe the California Coastal Commission is still probably one that we would want to talk to. Land Watch, Monterey Salinas Transit, and Monterey Bay Sanctuary. So we're almost through most of the ones we had thought about. One thing that staff did is we did go look back at our, you know, our list of data sources and data gaps. And one thing that we did know is we hadn't really heard from anyone on the topic of public health in terms of vulnerability of our residents in terms of public health, and we had some questions as to whether any of our community members had any thoughts on whom we might try to, you know, hear from, especially since we've seen some potential impacts on public health from some of our recent wildfires in, you know, throughout California, possible other sources of public health issues with climate change. So any thoughts from anybody?
No thoughts? Do you think we should start by, so I have two ideas. One, we could start by just surveying what other coastal communities have done with respect to sort of the public health of their resilience planning. The other way, you know, maybe to get a slightly different take on it would be to just approach the Monterey County Department of Health. It's not like they're really busy these days. So maybe that, maybe there's an opening there. I don't.
Yeah, I could potentially start with the planner. We had heard from Kelsey about the hazard mitigation plan. She might be able to put us in contact with somebody out there. Okay, I could do that. And I can see what some of the other local jurisdictions might have done. We have a couple of hands up.
Libby? I can't tell whose hand was up first. Libby?
Yeah, John's was up first. Let him go.
I don't see John's hand up. Did John, you raise your hand?
No.
John's shaking his head.
Oh, maybe it's Laura. Okay.
Yeah,
Laura will go then.
No question here.
So.
Okay.
Okay. So today I've this whole week I've been on the AIA grassroots kind of conference, online conference, and you know, one of the things that they have driven home is they're talking about you know, sustainability, but also resilience, but also diversity and inclusion. So I think it would be important to address how the city of Carmel, like how you want to approach that, you know, in terms of in like, let's say for electrification, you know, how we can include all of our, community, all of our, let's say, economic ranges of residents. So I know there was talk about having incentives for electrification for people of low income as one option, or as one, that's out there. But I just wanted to see if there was something that you guys had thought of, if you had thought of this kind of the issue of including, how we include everyone in this as we move into, a more resilient community. That's all.
Okay. I don't have an answer for you on that question right now. Laura?
Okay.
No question here, darling. I'm good.
Okay. I know, so moving on a tiny bit, I know Lynette wanted to talk about this a little bit.
Well, as always, Lynette wants to talk a little bit. I know you guys know that I've been working with some of the schools in the area, and recently had a really excellent meeting with the Carmel High School Environmental Club. And we had talked about the possibility of having schools do a brief presentation to us of what their initiatives are. And the Environmental Club at CHS is doing some really fun, interesting, and meaningful activities. And with the committee's consent, I would like for us to invite them to do a presentation at our next meeting. They have done a couple of presentations, formal presentations. One of them is to their sister community in Germany to help those students understand what students here are doing. It's a really great presentation, and with minor modification, I think it'd be really good for our committee to see that. And they're also really enthusiastic, and I think that hearing their enthusiasm and their commitment and their point of view is of great value to us. So I'd love to be able to extend that invitation to them for next month.
Well, I think that's a great idea. It's pretty easy for staff. I know you'll do a good job of working with the school to make it relevant to what we're doing. So I'd be pretty excited to hear from them.
Okay, great. The second thing I had, and this is my last thing, is that I also sent this to Agnes, Carrie, and Jeff earlier. The ICARP newsletter has come out, and they have in their partner updates a really great new tool that's just been released. And it is a very interactive tool that gives a local climate change snapshot. So I don't know, Agnes, if you want to allow me to share my screen for like a minute, or if that's even possible on this platform.
Yeah. Okay. You should be able to share your screen using the present now.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I will go to this tool.
It's happening.
Am I sharing?
Yeah. Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Okay, well, I can't see you anymore. So this is the email that came from ICARP, and it is the newsletter that they send out. And I will send the site, so if you want, you can go on and play with this yourself. It, under the partner update section, has a local climate change snapshot tool. And that tool allows a user to go in and choose the city where they would like to see what the changes would be. And it didn't quite take my change to Carmel, but it
Just
will
leave off
in a second.
California. Just do Carmel. Just do Carmel and see what happens. I think I did that and it worked.
Well, it has worked for me 3 other times today. Oh, here we are. Okay. So now we have our own personalized snapshot for the city for temperature, precipitation, and wildfire risks. And this tool models back from 1950 all the way to the end of the current century, giving a number of different measures. This one, for instance, is the annual average maximum temperature. And it shows this with both what has been observed in the past, what a medium emissions scenario would look like, and then overlaying that with the higher emissions so that you get everything from the past all the way through to the end of the century. And it does the same thing with precipitation. There's a difference in the temperature and in the precipitation model in that there's not a real significant change in temperature, or there is in temperature, but not precipitation. But the issue, as we have heard and talked about before, is longer periods of drought and more precipitation during storm events. And then finally wildfires, and it's showing us what medium emissions might mean in terms of wildfire change back from the end of the 50s all the way through the end of the century. And then it shows numerically what those changes are in terms of, in this example, acres burned, and in the last example on temperature, the number of inches of rain, and during which year and under what circumstances. And I really felt that this was a good tool. I thought it was something that the committee should be aware of and be able to go in and model on your own, because it is pretty interactive so that you can make changes and view different elements of the reporting. So I will send that to everybody, and it's the CalAdapt new model.
Great. Let's let, we spoke earlier about Agnes sending out an email with some of your stuff in it. So why don't we let Agnes send this out, Lynette?
Yeah, and just to clarify, we have shared the CalAdapt tool before. They constantly update and improve it, but that is the tool we would be using for most of our numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lynette's left us.
I think she's frozen.
That's unfortunate.
Maybe it's that electricity thing. Oh, no. All right. Well, that's a great resource, it looks like. So we'll take a look at that. And obviously, Agnes is going to incorporate some of that information into the report, right?
Yes, we're definitely incorporating that information in the report. Yeah.
All right. Anything else? Should we move on to topic 4? Because the last topic, I think, is we're going to have some discussion there. So, Lynette, are you back? No.
Back, but muted.
Did you hear me? And I just cut myself off at the end?
Yeah. So
okay, perfect.
We're going to be using that information as part of the report. So thank you for sharing that.
Okay, thank you.
So I think the last item, Jeff, we do want to save time for. So do we do that one first before we move on to the review of the summary sheets? Because we did a lot of that last time. What do you think?
I think we could do item 5 first and then come back. I think the summary sheets, I know we have a pretty short agenda next month, which is sort of on purpose. And there's really, if we end up not doing item 4 today, we could always just continue it to next month.
Yes, we could.
Is that okay with you, Agnes?
Yes, that's fine.
Great.
Excellent. So I think Agnes was going to kind of give us a project status update based on the timelines. And then Jeff and I are going to kind of give an update in terms of what happened at the last council meeting in regards to budget and the like, right?
Yes. So I'll take on the climate adaptation plan work plan and where we are as far as that goes, and then Evan can sort of go over the climate action plan work plan. So we shared both tables, updated tables with the agenda packet, and I should have had it on my screen, but I don't have it with me, so I hope everybody has it with them. The summary basically is we've gone through most of the tasks that we set out for ourselves for phase 1 of the project, which was, basically defining the project and beginning outreach and reaching out to other organizations and to the public. So we've done most of these tasks. We've also done our first update to City Council that was done in December. That was all on time, on target. We're now entering into phase 2, which is assessing the city vulnerability. And we've actually started some of this work with a lot of the presentations that we've received and starting to take notes on some of our vulnerabilities, whether it's with the urban forest or with our coastal infrastructure. So I think, we've already got a leg up on here. The next 3 steps, are describing historical hazard events, which we've started working on, impacts and identified vulnerabilities, finalizing our list of climate effects of most concern and assets and populations that will be susceptible to them, and starting to put a list together of our adaptive capacity and existing resources. So staff needs to start, putting some of this documentation together so that the committee can start reviewing these items, and so we can start making some vulnerability scores put some vulnerability scores together. So we're looking to work on these items over the next couple of months. The rest of February through the month of April, and start bringing back some of these for the committee to review in April.
Great.
One reason why we're trying to have a shorter agenda next time is to give the staff time to focus on the report rather than agenda management. Exactly. So that's why if we can limit our agenda next time to the PG&E presentation and then briefly discussing the 2 summaries and hopefully my summary, then that would give staff some time to focus on the pulling the report, starting to pull the report together, right?
Right. And I think the high school presentation also was added.
Oh, yes, yes. If they can come by then.
If they can do it,
so Lynette will keep us posted on that.
And on the climate action side of things, Evan?
Yes, I apologize for not having the camera. My phone's having a hard time keeping up with the stream, so I turned the camera off. So we are about halfway through phase 2. We successfully completed phase 1. Amory's presentation was a kind of a great segue into where we are now. where we're right at the start of preparing the climate action plan. A big point that he made in his presentation was the forecasting. So that's the business as usual forecast, the adjusted forecast, and then the trends to meet the state goals. Where we left off before was it was determined that we cannot do those forecasts in-house, so we will need consultant support on that, which does cost some money. We are looking to ask council at a meeting in the future for assistance with that. I don't know, was the meeting date, it seems like the meeting date was bounced around. Did we ever come to a
I think Carrie or Jeff can address that probably.
Oh,
go ahead, Jeff.
Yes. Is this the time, Carrie?
Yes.
The council did have a budget discussion last month, and the subject of making sort of a budget adjustment to fund this greenhouse gas prediction work was presented to the council. And I think we had a pretty good discussion last month. The committee had a good discussion last month on the importance of this and the trade-offs between this and the sea level rise work and whatnot. In the interest of providing more information to the council, we are going back for another. We didn't get a no. I'm confident that we'll get the money, but we are going back for another presentation this coming in March, which will be on March the 2nd. So I expect that we'll have I'm hoping and expect that we'll have our allocation of money to do our greenhouse gas work as of March the 2nd. And yes. I know that someone had asked me about the efficacy of writing to the council and expressing your views, and our word on that is you are welcome to do that. So if you believe that we should be allocated this money to do what we all think is pretty important work, you are free, and I wouldn't necessarily encourage you, but you are free to express those views to all of the members of the council.
Yeah, so assuming everything goes well there, we would be able to bring a consultant on board to basically continue through phase 2 and then on to phase 3, which is really the part where we can start getting creative with working through the climate action plan and identifying strategies to meet the established targets. But until we have a consultant on board, we're kind of at a standstill. We can definitely start to, brainstorm the ideas. But
I'm pretty optimistic, but yes.
Well, I think the reason we're having to go back is the council wants more clarification on the necessity of the greenhouse gas project. I think the city is and our fellow council members are taking a very conservative approach to this fiscal year's budget, given what we've been through. So I think we're hoping that our fellow council people, will understand the work that has gone into this committee, the work we're doing for the future of Carmel, and that's kind of the way we want to present it, so that we will get the support. We're asking for $20,000. The budget looks like we're probably over budget in the good, to the tune about 400,000. So we're hoping that our fellow city council members will understand the need to keep things on the correct timeline, which Agnes is going to help with that, and that we're really looking for this for the future of Carmel. So I think some of our other council members don't understand the work we've put into this so far. So we're going to try to explain that to them. It all has to also integrates with the general plan. And some of these mandates that have come down, in which we heard about tonight. So part of it is trying to explain the necessity for what we're doing and the effort we're putting it into. So I would encourage people to reach out to other city council or the entire city council and trying to explain the important work we're doing.
Yes, and to add to Carrie's comments, if you send comments to the council and you send them to the city clerk, we do now compile all of the comments that were sent to all of the council members. And so such correspondence would definitely be added to the public record of the meeting, and that would be good.
Just as a point of clarification, in communication to the council, is it either Carrie, yours, or Jeff's opinion that the greater weight is placed on compliance or community, you do it for the community because it's good for the community? Or where is the weight of the decision, if you will? I mean, granted that we think we're going to get the 20,000, but these comments that we might make would seem to be in support of future efforts as well, not just this one.
Yeah, I would encourage you, I would ask that you not ask us these questions, mostly because my experience as a council member, and I'm sure Carrie's too, is that people have, I don't know what the right answer is in talking to all the other council members, and we get lots of correspondence, and you never know when a piece of correspondence from someone is going to cause something to trigger off in our brains and say, oh, that makes sense. And I think that one of the great things is having lots of varied correspondence on a particular issue. The work that we do means different things to everybody. And so if you're inclined to write something to the council, I would encourage you to write something that you think, and that is from your heart and addresses what you think, why you think we're doing this and why you think it's important, and just do that. And I mean that very, very sincerely. Those sort of written from the heart letters that are all different from one another are by far, they're very effective.
Okay, point taken. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you're also all welcome to listen in and make comments during public comment on the topic as well. The agenda is not out yet, so we don't know what order it is in, but we should get it next week, usually by Wednesday. Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of next week, and then we'll have a better idea of where it will be on the agenda. So if you do want to listen in and even make a comment during public comment, you're welcome to do that as well. So I will say that the focus at the last city council meeting was more about the necessity and mandates. And I think Agnes has done a very good job of addressing that. So hopefully that concern will be addressed. And so then it becomes also a part of, what the goals we have in mind for the city, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Anything else, Jeff, or committee members, or?
Agnes and Evan, are you guys finished with your sort of wrap up of where you are? Do we have questions from other committee members or members of the public about where we are, or how you would like to see us sort of proceed to, you know, the remainder of the project?
I don't have too much more to, or anything to really add, but I'm more than happy to answer questions if anyone, you know, has questions about what's expected or what comes next.
Well, I think these timelines that Evan and Agnes have set up have helped keep us on course. You know, we realize what needs to come next. So they've been very important. And of course, these presentations that we've been focusing on lately have been extremely helpful and part of what we're doing. I think I appreciate what Evan and Agnes have done in their work for this committee and kind of keeping us on track and their expertise. So thank you.
Yeah, I think, and to add to Carrie's point, I think that the next 4 months, especially on the vulnerability side, are pretty important. Mm-hmm. And it looks like we're going to maybe lose a month at the beginning. So we'll have to be sort of on schedule and have everybody be present at these meetings and ready to have some, you know, we've had some great discussions up to now. And I think what we're going to have over the next 6 months is a lot of discussion. Mm-hmm. That's what it looks like to me from reading these reports, from reading the project plan. So I hope everybody has been great so far. We look forward to it. Okay. So good, Carrie. Should we go back to item 4?
Yes, I think we're ready for that one. I just want to make sure we get everything covered we need to cover.
All right. So item 4, we have two summary reports. We had the second version of Scott's report on the coastal infrastructure. We could start with that one and see if anybody has any comments on the revised.
And I'll just make a real quick opening comment just to say that what I look to do is just incorporate all the feedback from last time. I didn't do anything beyond that other than the good feedback that I received. So if something's not in there, it was my mistake and just not capturing it, but that was my attempt.
Did anyone have any, go ahead.
Any comments on this?
I think it looks great.
Me too.
Great, yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Excellent.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, welcome.
Can we move on to the last one, the storm drain system?
Yes. Any comments on the storm drain master plan?
So, Agnes, I had a comment, and it's sort of identified in possible actions. It says upsizing pipes as repair projects are conducted so that critical components of the system can eventually handle larger storms. And my question was, you know, what I could envision the committee saying to the city council would be, you know, we have a $10 million project that we need to complete over 15 years. And so we need to allocate, you know, $500,000 a year. And I know that math doesn't work, but $500,000 a year to get this work done. And my fear is that we're not reaching for the right target, that we're reaching for the 10-year target and not the slightly larger target. And I know it says sort of upsizing pipes, but do you think, is the city in a position, given that we have this 10-year plan, is that enough of a plan to get us to the 20-year storms? Do we need to do a little bit of rework on the storm drain plan while it's still fresh in everybody's mind to figure out what the numbers are so that we do the right thing the first time and we don't have to go back and rework some of the rework?
the storm drain master plan really identifies sort of the low-hanging fruits that are currently a big problem. If we upsize the pipes as we do those projects, those sections of pipes could be sized to a 20-year storm. That's not going to size the entire system to a 20-year storm, but it will get us that much closer. Then, as we continue on, we continue to keep track of the system, and as more sections need to be upgraded, those could also be upsized. So this is a potentially multi-year program, but probably the most effective way to address our current issues and eventually increase the size of the system overall is how I'm looking at it. Because what is being identified right now as the priority projects are areas that are not currently making us meet the 10-year storm. So those projects would get us to 10-year, and if we upsize pipes as we do this, those projects could be sized to a 20-year. And then once these projects are done, we can start looking at other, less, not as high priority sort of projects. But these are still going to be, those are our bottlenecks right now for a 10-year storm even.
So let me rephrase my question a tiny bit. So one of the things in the plan was to get rid of that big workaround down on Junipero and Mission.
Yes.
So if the council allocated $800,000 or whatever the cost was to do that work next year, would Public Works have enough information to know how big the pipe needs to be? Could you off the cuff resize the pipe from like a 12-inch pipe to a 15-inch pipe and just say, put in the 15-inch pipe instead? Is that, so basically that's my question when it comes to redoing the plan.
So the plan really doesn't, the plan doesn't address the design that goes into the repair itself, right? So the plan, okay. So as part of the repair, there's a design for the repair. And as part of that design, we could consider whether we want the repair design to be for a 10-year storm or a 20-year storm. And as part of that design, that's where we would address being able to handle larger storms in that section of pipe. But the storm drain master plan doesn't go to the level of detail that you need in order to design and build, really your replacements. It just takes an overall look at the system and identifies where your issues are and gives you a ballpark number of what the costs are going to be. But as part of the design of each of those repairs, we would be able to look at whether we want to upsize pipes and whether we should, do for a 20-year as opposed to a 10-year storm.
Okay.
Michael had his hand up.
Well, first I want to say I haven't looked at the storm drain master plan. So maybe I'm asking something which is already addressed by it, but I'll ask it anyhow. When you're talking about upsizing pipes, when you're replacing different locations, it seems to me if you don't have a completely holistic flow plan, that may not get the desired effect you want, because if you have a larger diameter pipe that's been hooking up to a smaller diameter pipe, you're going to restrict the flow. So I'm not really.
So the storm drain master plan does do a holistic flow plan. It has like a hydrologic and a hydraulic analysis, so it looks exactly at that. The main issue is it would be extremely costly for us to replace the entire system to be able to handle 20 years. So that's that's the primary reason why we can't do that right now.
It's costly enough just to fix it. Are you kidding?
Right. So that, but that's how others have done it before, where we upgrade in sections and eventually the whole system can handle. So yes, you are right. There would be sections of pipes that would start, being the constricting points because they would be sized to a 10-year storm, while others would be sized to a 20-year storm. So that would have to be taken into account in the design, but replacing the entire system all at once is also not looking like an option. So that's sort of the way that we would look at it on our end to make it cost effective.
Well, is it cost effective then if you decide to put in a larger pipe because the whole system isn't designed for, the 20-year flow?
So
I'm wondering if it's even worth considering that if we don't have the money, it's too costly to design it for a 20-year event. That's what I'm assuming you're referring to. Then why go to the expense at all to put in a bigger pipe?
It would be so that eventually your system would be sized for a 20-year event. Whether you put a 10 or 20, like a pipe size for a 10-year storm or a 20-year storm, your pipes will then be able to handle a 10-year storm for sure. Your system would be able to handle a 10-year storm. And then some parts of it would be able to handle a 20-year storm, which still doesn't do you much good if some other parts down below only handle a 10-year storm. But once you have that taken care of, then that can be your next replacement location is your downstream pipes that don't handle the 20-year storm. That's not part of the storm drain master plan at the moment. The storm drain master plan at the moment only looks at the 10-year storm. So, we could decide that we're okay with just a 10-year storm, but if we, as a committee, decide that maybe the city should look at having a little extra. So this is where we sort of decide what's an easier, which way we want to go as a city. Do we want to size our system larger, or we could look at other alternatives of reducing runoff to our system? That would be another thing that we could look at, is surface, infrastructure and things on private property to help reduce the volume of runoff in the system.
Agnes, I know that when...
Thank you, Agnes.
I'm just going to continue down this road that I started, that Michael continued. When Bob has presented to us, and the council got a $10 million estimate for a 10-year storm plan. Was there a number that was produced for a bigger plan, a bigger storm, or just no? And I don't think there was, but I'm just trying to be sure.
There was not.
And so I saw that Nancy Toomey posted a link to the city's storm drain plan, which is also pretty prominently on the city website. But I think we at least had a presentation of all the details a couple of months ago, and the council did too last month. So the presentation is sort of out there. I'm still I'm still a little bit hesitant for the same reasons that Michael is. I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what to do about it. Maybe Michael and I, since Michael has volunteered, could take this offline with Bob, with you and Bob, and cool. Maybe the two of us could have our concerns could talk to him about our concerns, and then we could come back. Maybe we could come back in a couple of months with. Let's see, Agnes, you wrote this one. So maybe the three of us could talk to Bob, and we could come back in a couple of months, in 2 months, with a revision.
Sure.
Or not, depending on how it works. Does that sound okay with you, Michael? Okay.
There's Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, this time I really do. With all of that having been said, would it make sense, and this might not be applicable, but just a thought, would it make sense to work from the end point of where the water goes into and then backwards so that there is no constriction? So it goes from small to big, so it doesn't ever go from big to small, so that we eliminate that issue right off the bat by just starting at the end and then working our way back to the beginning? I guess that would be a question for Bob, but
the issue being the stormwater lady, the issue that I would see with that is that we wouldn't address our highest priority pinch points in the system. Yeah. So we would potentially address those way down the line where there's currently flooding issues, because all of it is expensive. So
yeah,
so that would be the only, that does make sense from a
layman's point of view.
From a whole system, perspective. But in terms of addressing our current flooding issues, it would be more problematic.
Got it. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Anybody else before we sort of disappear and Michael and I and Anya's take this offline and come back?
Yeah, just one other question for Anya's. Does the master plan include any increase in the filtration aspect of our runoff?
You mean in terms of water quality?
Yeah, when Bob presented it, he was talking about there were like 4 areas where currently the outflow is filtered in some way before it reaches the bay. So does the master plan include any upgrades in that area, or?
Yeah, it has a couple of projects in it that would help. One that would upsize the hydrodynamic separator that we have down at the end of Ocean Avenue. That would help increase its capacity to manage sediment. And it has another project at Forest Hill Park that would modify the course of the stream through the park to help reduce sediment erosion in that area, because there's a lot of erosion over there, and would help actually capture sediment before it goes down the slope. So there's a couple of projects that address that. I think it also mentions the hydrodynamic separators also, just generally, but in terms of specific projects, it has those 2 projects.
I know he mentioned there were 16, I think, outflows right now currently.
Yes, so the hydrodynamic separators are at our 4 main storm drain systems, so 4th Avenue, Ocean Avenue, 8th Avenue, and the storm drain that goes to Mission Trail Nature Preserve. So we have separators on those 4. We don't have any separators on any of the ones that collect basically the surface street in the southwest part of town.
Where's the one on 4th Avenue, just out of curiosity?
It is right almost at the intersection of 4th and San Antonio. There are a couple of large manhole covers that are along the walking path. That's where it is.
Oh. And so the water that I see running down 4th Avenue through those little pits on the walkway then flows into that separator device before it flows out. Yes. And then it flows underground all the way to
the outfall. Yep.
Which is also somewhere on our capital improvement project budget list too, I think. That thing. Okay. Any more comments? So looking forward to next month, we have a short meeting. Well, hopefully we'll have a shorter meeting. Do you guys want to meet at 3:30 or 4? Nobody cares.
3:30.
I'm sorry?
3:30.
Okay. 3:30 is okay with everybody?
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you all next month, and I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.